may I the qualities of the levels and paths, and thus swiftly attain the state of Vajradhara. So let's just go to the All Limitless Contemplations. May all beings have happiness and create the causes of happiness. May they all be free from suffering and creating the causes of suffering. May they find that noble happiness which can never be tainted by suffering. May they attain universal impartial compassion, free of worldly bias towards friends and enemies. Semjen damje dewatang deweju tang den baju jig Dungal tang, dungal chichu tang tra waju chik, dungal mepe dewa tampa tang mindra waju chik, nering chak tang ni tang tra we tang nom chembola ne pa ju chik. So good evening to all of you. Try and turn on your cameras if you can. Please, I hope last week that would make you get into the habit of turning them on. It's horrible when you're a teacher and you teach names. It's much better to teach beautiful, beautiful faces. Okay. And then if you put your cameras on, that's great. So tonight we're going to do the second last one of the Shambhala wisdom of the great Eastern Sun, the practical house for enlightened living. And this is part 6. And then we'll do part 7 next week. And then we'll leave it after that. You know, it's really such an important subject. It's almost like you teaching this subject is really like teaching you about life, just to take a different view of life. And understanding the wisdom of Shambhala means what, in essence? It basically means understanding basic human dignity. And Phil, we were talking earlier, basic human dignity. You've got to understand basic human dignity, no matter what's going on in your land, in your country, in your elections, in everything. How to be a decent human being, how to live in a harmonious way, but not, you know, some religious people, they kind of tell you how decent they are, and they bring up their children with really good manners, but the decency isn't internal. It's like according to rituals. This is very different because it shows, Shambhala wisdom shows there's a path, a very sacred way to live, and how the world works. Now, this is so important when we are going through all these great difficulties in the world and wars and all of that. It really, really is amazing. And our duty, our joy, our fascination with life come together when we start waking up to this dignity, this complete and total dignity, this primordial dot, this awakened nature, which is compassionate, but it can still stand up for itself. It's not compassion dissolving, it's compassionate that it can stand up for itself. And I want to tell you this little story that was written by this guy. He says, during my second month of college, our professor gave us a pop quiz. I was a conscientious student and it breezed through the questions until I read the last one. What is the first name of the woman who cleans our school? Okay, that was the last question in this paper. Surely this was some kind of joke. I'd seen the cleaning woman several times. She was tall, dark-haired, and in her 50s, but how would I know her name? I handed in my paper, leaving the last question blank. Just before class ended, one student asked if the last question would count towards our quiz grade. Absolutely, said the professor. In your careers, you will meet many different people. All are significant, and they deserve your attention and care, even if all you do is smile and say hello and address the person by their name. I've never forgotten that lesson. I also learned her name was Dorothy. Okay. Now that is such a fabulous story, because we really need this. Without the dignity, without the beauty of our real, true, dignified beings, we really are pretty lost. And when Kandro last week spoke about joy, even with depression, that went so well together with the Shambhala teachings of what Trungpa actually says, because she said, you could find joy in even feeling the pain of sadness. And how can this be so? How can this be so? She was talking about her husband's death, and how she obviously felt a real pain of losing her great teacher and partner, yet the joy she found at his legacy for all sentient beings was in Shambhala training. It tells you to make your depression workable. Hello, Eugene. I'm glad to see you. To make your depression workable. Now, I'm working with a lot of people who suffer from depression, and they haven't made their depression workable, okay? So often the habit of depression is due to a feeling of a feeling good, Avril, a feeling of flexibility, of that part. How we make it workable is to know that our true nature is free from the stains, free from all the negative emotion, free from all our difficult circumstances. We must motivate ourselves to wake up to that nature with absolute conviction. Now, I've been saying this to people day in and day out. Yes, but what about your nature? I was listening to a talk by this Lama Lena, and she said, you think your personality is who you are. People say, oh, well, I'm quite an anxious person, or oh, well, I'm quite a depressed person, or oh, well, I'm a jacked up person. She says, I've got good and bad news for you. She said, the good news is that it's not permanent and doesn't last for long. The bad news is if you like yourself, it also doesn't last for long. So she said, just know that this personality, this being, this temporary, transient being is very, very temporary, very transient, and it can change. And once you connect to that nature, you really, really, really start to feel a certain joy about your sadness, because it's a certain feeling of getting there without the burden of our sadness. It's the spark of goodness within us. And our sadness is really vital. Our depression that we have is vital to understand others and allow us to actually become compassion, not give compassion because we think that's what we ought to do. It's a very different thing. It flows through us. And one of the gifts of the primordial dot of your own nature is called discriminating or discerning awareness, or discriminating and discerning wisdom. Now, a lot of you know they're the 5 wisdoms. I actually want to just do a talk on those 5 wisdom, because I really think that we can take them backwards and forwards and realize what our physical body is. But this particular wisdom, this discriminating, discerning wisdom, is what really helps us to discriminate, to discern between our relative, temporary, transient dramas and our ultimate purpose. I've got to say to you that I really, really think, and I'm going to throw it open in a minute or two, but I really, really think that people have lost the plot a lot in this world today. I think people are so confused and so deluded that they've lost the plot. And it's like so nice when you meet someone who's kind, and when you're kind, and when you give some kindness to somebody. I always make it my business when I'm going through the till of the supermarket to really get to know that person behind the till. And I meet the most amazing people like this, just to chat and say, how are you? I always go to them, what's news? So then they go, oh, nothing. Then I go, well, how come I saw you talking to the packer? Blah, blah, blah. I want to hear some of your news. And then that relaxes them. And then they start opening up to this is happening and that's happening. And then it's amazing. Often I've had them saying to me, so what can I do about it? And then I go, let's give you a different view to what you're going through. And so in that little encounter, often have an amazing, just a contact for a minute. And when you actually get your wonderful basic goodness, when you can see other people and you can see what they need and you can go out of yourself to them. And then we begin to know from that this is just what we needed. This circumstance, this awful thing that's happening to us is just what we needed for either our work or our service to beings or to learn or to pay back karma relatively. Most of our things are just on a relative level. So despite the depression, there's a knowing and awareness that we're in the right place at the right time. Now, when you have that awareness, it doesn't matter. I'm sitting in a house I really don't like, but it's the right place at the right time. My husband doesn't believe me, but I know that it is the right place at the right time. Why? Because when I look deeply, living in this limbo state, it's teaching me the most wonderful impermanence about life. Not having my possessions, not having my things, but it's really teaching me, because one of these bright days I'm going off to the other dimension and I'm certainly not taking stuff with me. And that's what Lama Lena says. We're so busy with the stuff, the emotions, the things we're going through, the experiences, the negative things, all the things. We're so busy with our stuff. It's called the movement of the mind. And when we're busy with the movement of the mind, we forget that this is reflecting that movement. So you need to change this in order to change that movement. So this beautiful story tells exactly what it is. Once a samurai came before Zen master Hakuin. This was in the 17th century. You're supposed to be a great Zen master, he said. So I want you to tell me the truth about heaven and hell. Do they really exist? Without a moment's hesitation, Hakuin responded, what? Even such an ugly and untalented man as you can become a samurai? Amazing. Immediately, the proud samurai became angry and drew his sword out, and he said, I'll kill you, he roared. Fearlessly, Hakuin said, this is hell. And then the samurai paused and grew thoughtful. His face softened from its angry scowl. Sheathing his sword, he put his hands together, palm to palm, and bowed before Hakuin. And this, said Hakuin just as calmly, is heaven. Now, when you understand that story, beautifully put by this master, you understand perfectly that heaven and that hell is created by your mind. There is nothing that is external created by anyone else. It is created by you, for you. And that's what the Shambhala wisdom is about. To know that I'm in the right place at the right time, and that what my circumstances are, what my feelings are, is just my mind's creation. So we can change the view of our minds at any moment, and we can put joy together with sadness. We can be going through a bereavement and we can put it together. Viktor Frankl, when he told the story, and I heard him telling the story from his mouth, not from a tape or anything, because I had the chance of going to see him. He was in his 90s, and someone gave me a ticket to actually go to Pretoria, to the university, where he gave a lecture to thousands. There were many, many people. And I was so thrilled with that ticket, I went by myself. So he said like this. He said he was counseling a very old man who was suffering from depression because his wife had died. Tell me, he asked the man. He came to him as a psychiatrist because he wanted medication because he couldn't bear the pain of the loss of his wife. So he said, tell me, said Viktor Frankl, what would have happened to your wife if you had died first? She would never have managed, he replied. She didn't know how to do anything. She would have suffered so badly. And then he said, well, think of it this way. You saved her from that very, very terrible circumstance. What he was doing is he was getting him to extract meaning from the suffering. So she died first, and that left you very sad, but it also leaves you very glad that she didn't have to go through it by herself. Now think about that. He said that it was amazing. And the old man said when he looked at it from that view, he was grateful it was him that remained and not her. So every single situation that we create for ourselves is so that we can learn something or finish something or clear the imprints or whatever we have to do. And so we can get joy and actually bow to it like the samurai did. Now, remember what Viktor Frankl, he had this equation. He said, depression and pain equals suffering with no meaning. So you get depressed when you can't see the view of the truth of what it is. And that's what the Shambhala teaching is about. And he said, I remember he gave this example. He said, if you've got an empty toothpaste tube, okay, but you really, really, really haven't got any toothpaste, you've forgotten to buy, and you need to brush your teeth. He says, you'll squeeze and squeeze and squeeze from the bottom until toothpaste comes out. He said, now you need to squeeze meaning out of every single thing you go through. And in the Shambhala whole enlightened community, they see the truth of everything and they make it sacred. And the Shambhala wisdom makes us squeeze meaning out of our heart-rending circumstances. I know that I can really get stoned when I say there actually aren't victims in this world. People say, what about this? What about that one? In the war, in the hostages, in the this, in the that. Well, relatively, there are victims. But ultimately, there are no victims because everybody is in the situation they need to be in to learn and be able to turn it into a sacred circumstance. I don't know, I want to go on to just talk a little bit about evil, but maybe anybody would like to ask or comment, please do, because I think it's so important with the Shambhala teaching to apply it to your life so that during the week you think, you know what? I saw something in a completely different view. I rose up in the helicopter and I looked down, and that difficult circumstance was just a tiny little dot in the whole panorama. Anybody want to ask or say? Please do. These Pam, she manages to come late. Anybody?
I had
Please.
a meeting with my manager some months ago, which I shared with you. And I had to go and speak with my manager about some stuff that I really wasn't looking forward to. And they kind of gave me their feedback. I listened to it and I really didn't kind of think much of it. But I took it on the chin and, that was that. And I just kind of shlucked it and moved on. And at the moment, I'm having to do my reflective practice portfolio for re-registration. It's something that we have to do routinely every 3 years. And I've decided to write upon this piece of feedback. And so I've done kind of loads of like academic kind of research around, what's been said and what I think and everything. And it's just incredible. Today's teaching is just sort of like absolutely the process that I've been through, because it was like, holy shit, they're right. They're right. There's no way round. There's no way round it. Like I've got a bit of a point, but really not much of a point. And I didn't take into consideration all of these other factors. And you know, it's just been like a it's been quite an incredible process, really, to be honest. And I'm very thankful of it.
And I think, Taulok, you should go to the person who wrote this, put your hands together like this, and
Well,
bow.
I've got to. He's the person that's got to sign it all off. So
Well, you go to, and then you go, you know what? I've been thinking very deeply about what you said. And you know what? You're actually right. And I'm going to change what you've put there. And I think it's very valuable. And thank you.
yeah,
That's putting joy into because,
yeah, it's what I'm going to do, really, to be honest.
and Patrul Rinpoche says that criticism is the real best thing when you get it for having no ego.
Yeah.
Because people criticize you, and it's always so interesting to me because sometimes I'll finish teaching a group, and then people will write to me and say, oh, I really got a lot out of that, and thank you, and I found it very interesting, and I'll get all these, and then I'll get one critique, in an amazing, Melanie, you said this and this and this, and I don't agree with you and everything. And then I think, yay, because it's so easy, because then there's a balance. If you get praise, you could think you're really doing a good job. And if you get a critique, then you really are ready to change it. Amazing. Phil, you wanted to say something. Please do. Just unmute yourself. Just unmute yourself. We can't hear you, Cooks. Just go at the bottom. Right.
You're speaking truth to power. That's the bottom line.
And how does that affect people?
Oh, it can change your life if you start living that way.
Exactly. And if you start,
change your life.
Absolutely. And if you start changing it, it's amazing because, in the Shambhala, they talk a lot about evil. And I ponder evil very, very deeply because if you turn on the television, I mean, there is so much evil in inverted commas. But when we look at it on social platforms, I mean, I think social platforms are probably one of the most destructive things that could ever be created. I see young people, teenagers and everything, how they are affected by social platforms, by the way people look. I'm so grateful I didn't have that growing up. And then you're comparing yourself to other people, and that's such rubbish because we all have this beautiful Buddha nature. But is this evil true? And could it get this far if we saw it with a different view? Like we were talking earlier about your new president and looking at it with a different view. Could evil be ignorance? Could evil be ignorance?
They actually are.
Yeah, ignoring the truth. Could
Yes, they
evil,
do.
yes, exactly, because it's ignoring the truth of how things really are, having that setting sun mentality and seeing it. The setting sun mentality says, this is evil and this is good. They just differentiate. And people who commit evil are actually people with deluded beliefs that make their unreal egos feel strong and true. But
Yes.
they're totally ignorant. They're totally ignoring the truth. But what happens if you are brought up? Let's say you, let's not use the terrorist groups, but let's use a mafia family where people grow up, even use a terrorist family where little children are told, you are superior. And your job is to kill people who don't feel like you do and to get rid of them. Even if you commit suicide doing it, you need to get rid of the people that don't believe the same in you. Is that evil or is that ignorance?
Well, it's ignorance.
Okay, but if it's ignorance-ful, then how do we change? How do we change? How do we help? Won't all our prayers for upliftment, all our prayers for trying to help people to see the truth from their own awakened nature, wouldn't that help more than when people sit and have a terrible conversation about all this terrible evil and how it is and everything else? If the deluded way of thinking disappeared, maybe the evil would. And maybe it's up to us to say it. And, I'm saying to you, we need to keep studying the karmic tapestry. We need to, that brought us to this point. Now, what I do all the time is I study people's karmic tapestries, and of course my own, because as soon as you study the tapestry, you can see the repetitive things. You can see what it's all about. But what I want all of you to actually understand is that what I was teaching them yesterday was about the primordial purity, which is called the Dharma Dhatu, which is called the empty, beautiful, pure space, and the Kunzi, which is the Alaya consciousness. Now, I want you to be able to differentiate between these two, because the Alaya, never mind the Alaya consciousness, the Alaya in which the Alaya consciousness exists is purely all your imprints of whatever you've done. But those imprints are not in your primordial purity. So whatever you're going through is coming from the Alaya, the Alaya consciousness, which goes with you from place to place. So if you can go through with joy all the things you've got to go through, then you can move into the primordial purity, which has none of that. You need to start discerning, oh, so my Alaya consciousness, in which all my human consciousness is registered, is different to the pure space of my primordial consciousness, where there are no stains. Surely makes sense for me to move into my primordial consciousness so that I can move into that place. And then, doesn't mean to say very hard things won't happen to you, but then I can see why. Look at the families we were born into them. Some of the families that people are born into, of lots of the people that I see, were totally dysfunctional. They were totally dysfunctional, totally, okay? And we spend our whole childhoods wishing we weren't there and feeling totally sorry for ourselves, being a victim of this abusive family or whatever the story is. Actually, ultimately, there are no victims, because when you read that Kunzi, it's called Kunzi in Tibetan, or the Alaya consciousness, you can see right away that the family that you catapulted into was the family with everything you needed, even though you don't like it, and even though you felt like a victim. But that is the family you needed in order to have a chance to clean that consciousness and clear it. And so we ought to be bowing and really going beyond that family and beyond what they learned, because the minute you get into the family, that those causes and conditions will come together. And as soon as you are able to say, hang on, those are my causes and conditions. That's why I've been born into this family. As soon as you could say that, then everything changes. Because relatively, we have a tiny view saying of this life. And so there seem to be plenty of victims, plenty of people going through all sorts of things. But ultimately, everybody is where they need to be. And perhaps Shambhala wisdom is based on ultimate truth, not relative truth. And if you keep on looking at ultimate truth, you see the world, because in the Shambhala world, which is an enlightened society, we have to liberate ourselves from our personal burdens and take on other people's burdens. I'm coming now to you, and take on other people's burdens with compassion. And how do we do that? Let me just see your question. How do we do that? How do we do that? So in mundane day-to-day life is being with the primordial, a moment-to-moment conscious practice of understanding and embracing its existence. Otherwise, how do we do it? It's a good question, Taluk, but I'll tell you what is different. That when you start living in the primordial consciousness, you don't have to consciously think about going along with that primordial dot. It's just automatic. Whenever you're caught in a situation, you already automatically go to that ultimate state.
Hello.
It's really, really important. Did you want to say something, Ab? Please.
Yes, sorry. Actually, I just wanted you to elaborate more on that notion of evil. Just if we can talk a little bit more about that concept.
Sure.
I'm trying to get my head around it. I mean, I'm understanding it in the context in which you're expressing it, but is there a concept of evil? Does it exist as
Well, in ultimate Buddhist terms, in ultimate Shambhala terms, I mean, Chogyam Trungpa writes about there's no aggression, so there's no evil. But if you look at evil, if you look at the word evil, it's when somebody perpetrates the space and dignity of another human being. It might even be to kill them, you know. It might be whatever they do, they perpetrate that space in an unbelievable way, okay? And look at that. You know, when people do it, I mean, you watch people who kill another person. Now on the television, there are these two guys who have been in prison for years and years and years and years, and they murdered their parents. So now after all these years in prison, they kind of saying, we did it in self-defense. I think it's quite late to wake up after many years in prison and say we did it in self-defense. But now this whole case is coming up. Like they said, we were born in this family. Our parents were terrible. We suffered the most terrible things. And so we decided to kill them.
But I mean, that's so if you are living as a Buddhist, then you are, you know, the miracle of the human birth, but it's also the miracle of being in the circumstances where you can have the teachings that give you the perspective. But for those that do not have that perspective, then, you know, they've grown up within that particular context and that family, and maybe there were great evils perpetrated against them that led, because if it's a happy family and everybody's if things are as they should be, generally speaking, your kids don't go around murdering you, if you know what I'm trying to say. So, but it could also be, I'm asking, can it also be that there exists just a state of pure evil that just operates
on a
without cause? Because in a way, it is always a relative reason for perpetrating a wrongdoing against another. So if you look at it from the bigger view, then there isn't evil. I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, you make sense completely. And I know what you're saying, because we are saying, is there evil? You know, we're saying, is there evil? But definitely when you see these things, when you hear what happens to people and how they get tortured, and in wars and in hostages and in things, when you look at that, it's absolutely unbelievable to see how much evil there is. But when you go deeply into it, what is that evil? That evil is deluded thinking. It's born out of deluded thinking. And the thing is that if we could see the truth, there definitely wouldn't be evil. But what I want to say to you is that it's very interesting, because sometimes you've got a person, I've heard of these stories, for example, where somebody sort of maybe hijacks and takes and kidnaps somebody, you know, and then they tell you, I've seen movies on it, and I've seen it where that hijacked victim just says one thing to the person, to the hijackers, and the whole relationship turns. And the whole thing is turned on its base. Now, it really, really is possible that if somebody was coming to murder you, and you were in your primordial space at that particular time, and something went through you which actually stopped them or actually hit them, and the evil wouldn't take place. It's really possible. But because of the momentum of deluded thinking and evil, it's really difficult. But what I'm trying to say to you is that sometimes one sentence to somebody could turn their entire lives upside down and could actually stop them from doing things. You know, if you take that beautiful story of Patrul Rinpoche, okay, so the guy comes in, and Patrul Rinpoche is very busy at his desk, at his little desk in his little humble home and everything. And he's got these two candlesticks, these two very, very precious candlesticks. So the guy creeps around thinking he's not seeing. He goes straight for the candlesticks and he takes them. But meanwhile, Patrul Rinpoche has got this totally enlightened mind. So while he's supposedly looking here, he can see exactly what's going on. So he says, as the guy's walking out, he says to him, be sure to sell them for a very good price. They are very valuable. So the guy, you know, thinks he isn't even seeing. The guy absolutely faints on the turn, okay? And he goes away. And he's totally rocked by this. He doesn't even want the candlesticks anymore. And a little bit later, he comes back to him and he says, Master, will you please teach me? And here are your candlesticks. But no, the story is a bit different. He actually gets caught by people and is brought back. I remember now, he's brought back to him. And actually, Patrul Rinpoche says, no, he's not a thief. I gave them to him. Because he did when he was walking out. And that's when so the police leave, and then he says, Master, please, would you teach me? So just think of that, because he was not attached to those candlesticks. So it was really very easy for him to just say, Don't forget to get the valuable price for the candlesticks, you know. It's actually an amazing source. So one sentence, when you've got that compassion coming from your primordial dot, one sentence can liberate another person. Why? Because that primordial purity, that true nature was always there, but the person doesn't recognize it and goes on, life after life. But one statement to it can awaken that person at that moment. So think about that in terms of evil and ignorance. Because in Buddhism, there's no such a thing as evil. In Shambhala, there was no such a thing as evil. It was deluded thinking. Very different when you say to someone you're evil or someone you're thinking in a deluded way. Very, very different. Very important, because how do we liberate ourselves from our personal burdens? And how do we take on other people's burdens? Only with that view, only with that different view. But so often we see that view for the moment, and then we go back to our burdens again. We go and pick them all up again. Why? Because we're so used to it. Somebody criticizes you and your heart's sore, but in a minute you remember, but maybe this is just to get my ego under control. And then you go home and you do it again. Okay, the energy veil, what are you saying here? Let's see.
I'm saying evil, if you break it down into the meaning and understanding, is actually an energy veil.
Oh,
What is
true.
veiled? The third eye is veiled that you cannot see the truth.
Exactly. And that's very beautifully put. And it's very important.
And yeah, I do believe there's evil, but it does come from not seeing the truth.
It definitely does. And when you understand it, it's amazing, because as Shambhala warriors, we appreciate the mundane and the extraordinary things without any preference. We appreciate both. We know how to put them together. Doesn't mean that if you want to go on an enlightened path, you have to go into the mountains somewhere and really be isolated. You can live in this world and just make little remarks to people all the time. And it's amazing, absolutely amazing, because you get that. I know for me, I was with Lama Yeshe Rinpoche on Sunday, and when I make comments to him, sometimes he just smiles. He doesn't say a word, okay? And when he smiles, what exactly are you saying? But that smile is enough. But we want a whole explanation. We want a whole talk. We want a whole reconfirmation of who we are. So I really want to go back to Chogyam Trungpa's teaching this week and next week and just look at a few more details of what he says about blaming and about awareness and about a sacred existence and certain principles that there are in the world. But let's do a little meditation. And I'm told that when I ring the gong, you actually can't hear it. I've got to, is that true? Because I always think you can hear it, but actually at the top of the Zoom, it says something about the music. So I'll have to go into that, but I'm scared I'll spoil everything. So you'll just have to hear my voice instead of the gong, because when I play the gong, apparently you can't hear it. So everybody, and Pam, especially you, because you missed the beginning. Okay, so everybody go into a beautiful posture. Okay, why? Why a beautiful posture? I'm going to mute everybody, because otherwise we're going to have a lot of different noises. Go into your beautiful posture. The reason you need the posture in the beginning is because you need to take your energy, your chi, and your posture and put them together. So it's very important only in the beginning Once you've got your energy into the central column and you've got your real awareness, you definitely don't have to sit hours and hours of practice. You just need to do it so that you can bring yourself to the present moment. So you're breathing in. And when you breathe in, try and do this time the breathing in through the nostrils and the breathing out longer through the breath. And as you breathe in, I want you to take in freshness. Freshness. I want you to just ponder that this beautiful nature of mind is fresh. What does fresh mean? Fresh means awake, alive, changeable in its expression, absolutely not exhausted, absolutely endless, spacious, absolute openness. So as you breathe in through your nostril, I want you to breathe in the openness, the spaciousness, the purity, the absolute sky. If you were in Cape Town or somewhere where there's a beautiful ocean, you can breathe in the ocean, the freshness of the air, the newness, the absolute possibility of everything. And when you breathe out the movement, the thoughts, the feelings, the situations that are driving you dilly. Breathe out absolutely all the movement. And then breathe in, move to breathing out a little bit longer, and the breathing in through the nostrils a little bit shorter. But each time you breathe in, I want you to bring the chi, the energy, into the central column. And I want you to breathe in the freshness, the aliveness, even after a long, harrowing day. There's a fresh, beautiful, open, spacious part of you. And you want to visit that regularly until it becomes part of you. And you want to breathe out all the movement. Don't change it. Don't change your attitude. Don't change anything. Just breathe it into the openness, and it will take care of itself. Just think how many times you go in to change things, to alter them, to analyze them, to interfere with them, to make them as you think they should be, to alter things, to change 1,000,001 things. And it doesn't really work. Sometimes it works, but so much energy. And all you have to do is breathe into the open, beautiful, sky-like, blue, absolute Dharma Dhatu. That absolute primordial consciousness which has everything in. It's yours. It's your inheritance. It's who you are. The rest is temporary, transient, habitual conditioning in your alaya. The alaya is blank, but the human consciousness puts all the imprints in. Breathe them out in a long breath and breathe in again. Just refresh yourself. Feel all the anxiety of the day just going into that spaciousness. Feel all your problems, all the negativity, all the struggles, all the difficulties. let them just go into the space and become sacred, as though you were that warrior who put your hands together and bowed to the universe for giving you the most special way, becoming who you need to become. Feel that gratitude in your heart. Open it out. That space of the Dharma Dhatu is full of gratitude, full of sacredness, full of understanding, full of compassion. Breathe it in and feel refreshed, refreshed from your day, refreshed from all the things you've gone in. What we're doing is creating a sacred existence and feeling uplifted into the breeze, into the space, into the freshness, into new arisings, pure, beautiful, sacred. Now turn that to yourself and see who you really are. Such a sacred being. Such a wonderful opportunity. Open portal to unity with that beautiful, pure, blue, open nature. Okay, everybody, I can't gong you because somebody's got to help me to get the music thing, because when I do this, you can't hear it, can you? Can you hear it? I've got to go to the top and get the music thing sorted out on Zoom. I will, okay? Never know, okay? What you saying, Tarlok?
I can't hear the gong. No.
I know, and the thing is that I've got to get this thing so that I can gong and bell and all sorts of things, you know, because it's really important. Okay, I know you've got to go, Mart. It's fine. You can catch up on the Zoom. Okay, everybody. So let's go back to this beautiful teaching now of where Chogyam Trungpa says to create that upliftedness. I just want to ask you, when last have you felt uplifted? Think about it, because we should be uplifted all day, every day. We really should. And think about when you last really felt uplifted. And you can perhaps help us, Tati, because he also talks about the wind horse. Now, I saw your Lama has the wind horse in their title, something like that. And the wind horse, do you know what it means? It means wind is the principle of being very airy and powerful. And horse means the energy is rideable, fresh and exuberant. We ride on basic goodness, free from obstructions and uplifted decency. Now that's what wind horse means, but I see they've got wind horse in your lamas, in their titles or something. Do you know it? Have you experienced it?
I don't know. I don't have a concept.
Yeah, it's very interesting because he talks about the wind horse, which is really very interesting. And letting go, when you let go, it's also the sadness and the joy joined together. I want you all to think of a situation where you really felt very sad, and feel if you can put joy together with that sadness. I'm going to put this on very hot, just for a bit. Okay, so whether you're having a good time or a bad time, you should feel sad and delighted at once. When you feel sad and tender, that brings ideas on how to uplift the whole world. Joining sadness and joy is the only mechanism that brings the vision of the great Eastern Sun. You know what to accept and what to reject. You join heaven and earth. It's really important. Heaven is the spacious, sacred, and earth is your personal existence. And you see every single earthly act as sacred. Is that possible for you? Is it possible for you to see what you're doing as sacred? Even when you're going to work, even when you're in the bus or the train, and you just greet somebody or you do something nice for somebody, it's very beautiful. We trust and appreciate the great Eastern Sun and vow not to use it for our personal achievement at all, otherwise we decline. So when you use this primordial purity to further your own gains and your own ego, then you've lost it. It's no longer anything that you really can do. You've lost it when you use it for your own personal gain. And I think when we study the setting sun approach, and we need to know, what is it that we're seeing on the television? What is it that we're hearing? What is it on the social media, okay? Because the conditioned existent indulges one's ego and glorifies oneself, and it produces more pain in the end than pleasure. Now, this beautiful story of Roshi, the founder of Zen, during the first formal interview I had with Roshi, he asked, "Are you vegetarian by any chance?" I replied proudly, "I never eat meat." He said, "Oh, don't be attached to any ideology or any belief." He said, so the guy said, "I thought, surprise. That is Zen. Do not be attached to anything. Of course, there's nothing wrong with being a vegetarian, but I was using this choice to support an image of myself as super spiritual." Roshi could easily see that my being a strict vegetarian had become a big point of ego attachment for me, and he wasted no time in making me conscious of my spiritual arrogance. Isn't that interesting? Because a lot of people will tell you all about their spiritual life and what they do. And if it's for ego, it actually doesn't work very well. It really, really doesn't. And that's a very important point. And another important point that Trungpa says is called blamelessness. Okay, blamelessness, which is a very important word, because blamelessness is how to love yourself. And he says, a lot of problems come from self-hatred. Let us let go of that we're at the right place at the right time. And he gives the example of the beautiful deer, D-E-E-R, not D-E-A-R. Now, if you've ever watched a deer, when you're watching beautiful animals, the deer with all its horns, he says, see the beautiful deer. They have no one to rule them, but they frolic in the meadow as if they had a deer keeper. They're so clean. They have such head and shoulders, beautifully horned. Now, you know, it's true when you see a deer walking around in the thing, they have these beautiful horns and they have their heads up, they have their shoulders back. What about you? Do you all have that? Can you be like the deer? he says his Shambhala name is Lord Mukpo of Tibet. He says lords are rejected, but will come back to the USA. We are all lords and ladies who perform their duties. And he says the Shambhala is not very complicated. The message of Shambhala, he said it's simply that the human condition can be worked out and conditions of neurosis can be overcome. He says, this Lord has worked his way through the problems of human society and understood them and worked for others. But first you have to help yourself and trust in your heart because you are here. Now I want to ask you, how do you overcome the conditions of the neurosis? Avril, you had your question, which was similar to that. How do you overcome the conditions of neurosis? I mean, when you've got a neurotic 10, I'm not saying you have, I'm saying from your question, okay? I'm just saying from your question, you might like to answer that. How do we work with neuroses? What are neuroses?
Sure.
Very important because the Shambhala way is very, very, very,
Sure,
very.
but, I mean, I'm trying to, I think for me, would be these habitual tendencies
Exactly.
and this karmic consequences that you
Exactly.
keep falling back into.
Exactly.
And
so,
how do
okay.
you, I think, so when you have those moments when you tap into that primordial dot and the
Right.
expansiveness, I mean, I'm just trying to like,
No, I think what you
maybe it's a conscious choice to move there, to try to move there, because you get caught up in the story. I mean, I'm not explaining this in very good Buddhist terms, but you know, it's that call back when you call yourself back from there, and then you go. It's that conscious choice when you go back into
the neuroses.
Well, to move away from the neuroses, or just maybe even just to see them. You know, that moment of awareness. I mean, it begins there.
No, but I mean, he asks the question, which would be the next sentence. How do you know the ceiling won't drop on your head? How do you know the floor won't give way? And he says, trust. Trust. You walk down a path and you hope it won't go into a pit hole. You hope there won't be an earthquake. You trust that you can walk along. He says, trust comes from realizing there are millions of worthwhile people and yourself who can connect with a Shambhala vision of basic goodness. He says, you need to develop blamelessness, which is very important. No logical excuses. Blamelessness means no logical excuses. I didn't practice because of this, or I didn't do this because of that. Blaming is different to taking responsibility for things. You sit or you stand upright. And he says blamelessness involves daringness. How do we stop blaming? How do we stop blaming our history, our parents, our genetics, our lack of opportunities? How do we stop blaming? Now, I'm giving the example of the South African government is still blaming apartheid. Now, apartheid certainly did a tremendous amount of damage, but 30 years later, it's time to take responsibility that all these state institutions were given in perfect working order. So what happened? How did the neurosis attack this, and what happened? I'll tell you exactly what happened if you look at it in terms of all of this. The hungry ghost mentality realm prevailed and everything got depleted. Now, what's the hungry ghost? What are all the realms? What's the human realm? What's the jealous God realm? What's the God realm? What's the hungry ghost realm? What's the hell realm? Very simple. The hell realm is someone whose neurotic tendencies are always anger, 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 and they live in a hell realm. And what they do is they attract other people who are also very angry, and they all live in a hell realm. When I was a lot younger, I used to go in my sleep state to these gatherings of people in hell realms, and it was really awful experience when you tried to teach them. You know, they used to throw things at you. I often used to go because the anger just goes on and on. That's the neurotic tendency. Now, the next realm is called the hungry ghost realm. And how do people get to the hungry ghost realm? When you think you haven't got enough. And whatever anybody gives you, you're saying, not enough. It doesn't fill the space of my hungry ghost. So I explain this to people, that there's a hungry ghost realm, which came from the deprivation before. So people can't get enough. So they start stealing and taking, even though they're taking away from other people who really need it. Now, I want you to think about this because, you know, if we create our own circumstances, so we can't blame where the karma lands us or after death, if unresolved, we can see it for what it truly is and move into a different zone. So when we ask the question, how do we overcome the neurosis? Exactly what you said is right. You move into that primordial consciousness because it overcomes the neurosis. The neurosis is just the habitual tendencies that you have. 1 inch of awareness and you pass them. You'll go back again, but another inch of awareness and then you'll go back again. And you keep doing it until you stay aware, and then you stop doing it.
Hard to stay there.
Yeah, isn't it true? Isn't
Yeah.
it true when you really look at it? Because I often say to myself, I don't understand why in this country, was a wealthy country with lots of mineral wealth, with many, many resources. And what happened here? What happened when this government got everything laid on their plate? Yes, there was all the stuff that went before, but you can't blame it anymore. You have to take responsibility for yourself and do things in a different way, don't you? You can't keep blaming 30 years later. We haven't got education because we were left out of education before.
Yeah, but the conditions, you know, how do
But
you get out of that? The conditions were set. So it's
well,
a long ongoing process to
Of course, but if you were aware, you would go to the teachers, the one who could do it, and you would ask for the instruction instead of trying to take everything and fill your hungry ghost mentality. Would be completely different. Listen, I'm going to go into the government and tell them about this, you know, and I'm going to help them to get out of the hungry ghost realm with their neuroses, and maybe we can change things after that. But blaming.
What was the realm, do you think, that came before this? I'm saying in this because you're using the South African context, so it's interesting. So we live, you could say we're currently sitting in the hungry ghost realm. So what do you think the previous...
But I'm not in a hungry ghost realm, and you're not in a hungry
No,
ghost.
but like the kind of, you could say that the general conditions of the country that we live in. So I wonder what was the realm, what realm do you think we were in before? If now is very much a manifestation of that.
Because you're born a human being, this is so important, because the first thing you've got to contemplate on is precious human birth. So the fact that we're actually born human is a really, really, really big privilege. Why? Mainly because if you can get past all the neuroses and everything, then you have a chance to get enlightened into that primordial space. And you don't have a chance in any of the other realms except the human realm. Even the God realm, you're going to fall. The God realm's like a Hollywood state where people have got everything they want, but in the end they fall. And that's exactly what happens, you know. So it's very interesting to see that these realms are all states of mind that we get into, and we need to get past it. We need to get into the human realm and try and overcome desire and craving and attachment and move into that primordial space if we really want to be able to do what we need to do in this life. And that's what the Shambhala training is about, not blaming and really being able to be okay.
Mm.
Anyone else want to say something or ask anything? It's really, really important because, you know, he says you need to attain to a higher realm, and being daring is human upliftedness, raising the head and shoulders. Daring is very direct, he says, but difficult to attain because we don't feel good about ourselves. We feel inadequate. Why do we feel inadequate if here you are learning about primordial consciousness and being a human being that's got food, that's got clothing, that's got a home, and you're learning the truth? What else did you want? I keep saying to people when I'm counseling them, what else did you want? You've got a lovely body, you've got a lovely face, you've got all the things you need, and you've come to your spiritual life. What else do you want? That's why you're here. Think about it, all of you. Think about it, because I just want to give you one more thing and then we'll end for tonight. That he says we have to sit up straight or stand straight. And he says Milarepa is often depicted cupping his right hand over his ear. So when you see the pictures of him, he's cupping his right hand over his ear, okay? And what's he doing? He's listening to his own song. He wants to hear his own song. Listening is a sense of personal inquisitiveness. And I just want to end by saying that in trying really to listen, I've often been inspired by the Zen master Suzuki Roshi, who said, if your mind is empty, it is always ready for anything. It's open to everything. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. The beginner's mind is an open mind, an empty mind, a ready mind. And if we really listen with a beginner's mind, we might really begin to hear. For if we listen with a silent mind, as free as possible from the clamor of preconceived ideas, a possibility will be created for the truth of the teachings to pierce us, and for the meaning of life and death to become increasingly and startlingly clear. My master Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche said, the more and more you listen, the more and more you hear. The more you hear, the deeper and deeper your understanding becomes. That's enough. I've done enough talking tonight. We have to hear. It's really important. And, you know, I think that this teaching is so good for our everyday lives and for what we want to do. It really, really is very important for that. So let's dedicate. I know that poor Fiona had to go. She's got her thesis to hand in. So she's under great duress and everything. So let's just dedicate ourselves. Doesn't matter, I'll just do it. So we dedicate to all sentient beings who are suffering. There are so many people in wars, in everything. In the Sudan, hundreds of people have just been killed. In all the wars in Ukraine, in Europe, in the Middle East, in everywhere. We pray for all those, in inverted commas, victims, to be able to awaken and find that what they're going through, there is a space from it that will always be able to accommodate everything that they're going through. And if they can bring the actual understanding of that, then they can pass into beautiful dimensions. So sonam die tamche zipane topne nepe dranam pamshene jegana chibala topaye sipe sole doa dro warsho. Anybody wants to ask anything, you're very welcome.